town. Well, he said it backwards. He knows where two of the streets' names came from. He didn't know the rest of them. And quite a few of them I know, there are some I had no idea. But I thought we'd start with Townsend Avenue first. That's the original street in town. The village of Wakeman originally was at the corner of 303 and 60. The center of Wakeman Township is actually in Evelyn Morey's driveway. There's a stake there, and that's the center of the township. And so the town was created and settled there until the railroad came through and moved it to where it is now, 1852. But Townsend Avenue has its name simply because it heads towards Townsend. Originally, it was known as Center Road. And the reason for the Center Road is that it connects the center of Wakeman Township, Camden Township, Pittsfield Township, and LaGrange Township are all, the center of them, all on Route 303 or Center Road. So that's where that name came from. Then when they started naming streets in town, they put the name Townsend on it. The only other association with Townsend that I've ever found in Wakeman, there was a Reverend Townsend that was a minister of the Congregation of Church at some time. So I'm quite sure that's not where the name came from. Then we'll go to River Street, which quite obviously it follows the river. It was originally known as Clarksfield Road, because of course went to Clarksfield from here. If you look at some of the older phone books, Route 60 is listed as the Vermilion Savannah Highway, especially if you get north of town where they have a Lorraine telephone. Every one of them is listed as the Vermilion Savannah Highway. Then a few years ago when they came with a new numbering system for the county, and that they changed everything around so that people live south of town have an address north of town. I don't know whether you realize that or not. Take Byron Dog, for example. I happen to know his address because it's an address we associate with the fire department. The number is 3333 Route 60 North, Wakeman. But it's 2 miles south of town. But where Barrett's Chapel is, at corner of Cook Road and 60, this side of New London is the north and south center of Huron County. So everything on this side of that is known as Route 60 North. Now, in the same way, east and west is that way. Route 601 is the center, east and west in the county. So everything this side of there is Route 20 east. Like Tom and Brenda Friends, their address is Route 20 East Wakeman. It's very confusing. And every once in a while we'll get a fire call, and I know the ambulances have the same situation that, Route 60 North, go north from town. It's not right. You have to know the numbering system. Route 303 is approximately 4,000 in their numbering system. Lincoln Road is 5,000. You got to have some kind of an idea on that. Go from there, or else take a good guess at it. River Street going north from 20 has always been called Route 60 North. The village called it that until this numbering system came in, and now all of a sudden it's River Street North too. Kenny, isn't your address listed as River Street North now? Or North? So they changed everything around on us with this numbering system. Church Street was the next street. I'm quite sure it's probably the second street named in Wakeman. That's the corner on Route 60 and Church Street, because the Congregation of Church stood on that corner for years. It was built in 1844, I think that church was built. Then where the big brick house has just been sold to Chris Hill. The church sat there, and then C.S. Clark moved it back on Church Street farther and used it for grain storage and stored grain in later on. Church itself. The next street was north. The only thing I can come up with that is north of the other streets in town. That's the only reason that I can come up with. Nobody has any idea where north came from. Same with Mechanic Street. The only thing I did find is that going back far enough in the generation of family, in one of the halls, they said the one son was a good mechanic. In the 1800s, you wouldn't have had a mechanic, you would have had a blacksmith. And I don't know whether there was a blacksmith shop stood over there. I know where there were 3 other ones ones here in town, but I never heard of one being on that street. But there's a possibility. They came up with Mechanic Street from having a blacksmith shop there. This man by the name of Hall would have been the blacksmith in it, evidently. Also added a street originally to it called New Street. And New Street doesn't exist any longer. That's where Helen Brooker lived for all those years. Her driveway was New Street, and it was a dedicated street until maybe 15 years ago. The village turned it back over to her, but it went right up almost to her garage. The street did. Only thing I can say, I can think of it was the newest street in town, so they just said New Street. Move on to something simpler. Main Street. Every town has a Main Street, but ours originally was called Railroad Street. We have a Railroad Street now that's on the north side of where the tracks were, but originally what was on the south side was the Railroad Street. Then when US Route 20 came through, or the town moved down there, it became Main Street at that time. It's also called several other things. As it turns a curve headed west, it becomes Height Street. And years ago, the Heights owned all the property where the laundromat is, where Vincent's allotment is, where Grady Acres is, Abbott Street, all that property over there belonged to the Mayor Height family. Actually, it's where he operated his still. I found this in Dr. Weeks' history book, where he had a still, and his mother was not very happy with him having his still there by the house, so he built a second still on the other side of the house so she couldn't see that one. But they operated it for years. They were quite a well-known family here in town. They had a sawmill and a lot of different things, and it finally worked its way down to the last two Heights left here were Bill and Johnny. Johnny knew where all the stills were. He lived behind the elevator in one of the little, I don't know, hog houses or whatever when he was around town here. Part of the time he was staying in the ditch. And I think he died in the ditch down by Elmer's, didn't he, Bill?
Yeah. Well, see, they had just a little building or room in there where he stayed down in the sheds that they had.
He had a boilerman's license, his steam operator. He could have gotten a job almost any place, but he couldn't stay sober long enough. His brother Bill was quite a character. He was around here for years. He worked for Parsons moving houses. Between him and Dick Parsons or Jim Parsons, and the three of them, they could have moved anything there was in the world. The last few years, Bill did all the heavy work. So that's where the name High Street came from. Route 20 is also known as the General McPherson Highway. I don't know whether anybody realizes that or not.
It's across the country, across Ohio.
Across Ohio is the General McPherson Highway. And the reason for that is General McPherson was the first general killed in the Civil War. And he was from Clyde, Ohio. He's buried in a cemetery there in Clyde. There's a big monument to him. Pardon?
That's the McPherson Cemetery.
Yes. That cemetery there in Clyde has the unfortunate distinction of having a war hero from every war since the Civil War buried in it. They had lost somebody, but General McPherson was the first one. And so the Route 20 is called the General McPherson Highway. It is a federal highway. It doesn't belong to the state of Ohio.
And isn't his house located on that corner?
I think so.
Yeah, moved in there, it's a museum.
Berlin Street. No one has any idea where the name Berlin came from. Two of my brothers live on Berlin Street, and Don says that every time he's been all over the country as a trucker, every time he gave his address, this Berlin Street, he said everybody looked at him and they said, "Don't you mean Berlin?" And he says, "No, it's with a V." And everybody said, "Never heard of such a thing." So where it came from, I have no idea. But I do know that it wasn't in where it was supposed to be. A few years ago when they re-blacktoped it, they found out that the street itself wasn't even in the street line property that the village owned, and they had to trade some property over here just south of Abbott Street to get it the street lined up with where it was supposed to be. Lee Timms said that when he cut the street in there, he the township's old road grader, and Carl Schultz was the mayor at the time, told him to go cut that street in and cut Clark Street in, and he asked him, well, what do I go by? And he says, follow the cow path up through there. And what do I use for grade? And they said, sit on the seat, and when the seat of your pants feels right on the grader, that's the grade you use. So Steve says that's what he put it in there. Merlin Street and Clark Street the same way. Clark Street was named because it was the Clark addition to the village of Wakeman. The whole section up there belonged to the Clark family. Which Clark, I haven't been able to distinguish in reading the history things, but C.S. Clark was the third generation of the Clarks here. There was a Dr. Clark came here first, the first doctor here in town, and Mrs. Clark was the first school teacher here in town. They lived out near the can fields where they lived, and they owned, the Clark family owned all this property. In fact, my brother Don's deed to his property listed as part of the Clark addition to the village of Wakeman. So that's where we got Clark Street.
Don't we have a diary of Mrs. Clark?
Yes, we do. The library has it.
And that's an interesting story too. So, you know, that we have part of that diary, and some man in the East was looking through genealogy, and he came across that, and he got in contact with our webmaster, said he had the other half of that diary. So
Because
then
part
he
of it was
said that.
destroyed, wasn't it?
Yeah, because his grandmother or great-grandmother was reading it, and as she was reading it, she was tearing the pages out and throwing it in the fireplace. So they said, "What are you reading?" So they rescued the rest of it, but it was the trip, the part of the diary that we had was her trip, after they got here. But he had the first part of the diary, I think, which was their trip to Wakeman. So those two have been combined now, and the library has a copy of that. And I think it's all on the web, isn't it?
I think so. We can put that out there. Cecil Street. Cecil Street is very interesting. Well, let's back up and go to Abbott Street first. Abbott Street, right under to the north of the library, was named for the Abbott family. And that family lived in the house at the end of Abbott Street at 60, just north of where the old school sat. And they owned the grist mill that was on the river. And then it was turned over to their son-in-law, Willis Gibson. And somewhere that in either his name was Willis Cecil Gibson or it was Cecil Willis Gibson. I don't know which it was, but he owned the grist mill that burnt down in 1900, and it was very mysterious about what happened. There are 2 or 3 different versions of it. My uncle related the story that there were unmentionables hanging around the grist mill all the time, and that he was going to go and chase these unmentionables away. He took his gun and left the house that night. And I asked Uncle Lyle, what are unmentionables? He says, I don't know. He said, I was too young. They wouldn't tell me at the time. He was only 5 years old when this happened. But Mr. Gibson went down there either to chase these people away, and one version was that these unmentionables killed him and set fire to the place to cover their tracks. And the other version is that he set fire to the place himself and skipped town that night. They never found bones enough to make a body, so they think that he actually burned the place down himself and left town. But he had a daughter by the name of Cecil. It was named after him. And she lived on Cecil Street. There was only the one house on Cecil Street. And so that's where that name came from. But they told about for years that she would go down on the bridge at night and just scream in the most blood-curdling sound. Cecil, Cecil, call his name out as though she was going to find him down there in the river. And they said a lot of the time she wasn't even awake. Somebody would go get her and walk her back home. And she lived to be an elderly lady, lived up into the 60s or 70s. I can remember when she passed away, but I don't know just exactly when it was. But she was a daughter of this man, and like my folks said, it was just blood-curdling to hear this sound at night and her screaming out that name. Depot Street, it's quite obvious that it went to the pasture depot, went south from there. But it also goes farther than what most people think. It ends at Abbott Street, but it into the south side of Apple Street, the depth of the original row of lots through there. Then there was a big field, it was always Hooker's Field, we always called it, belongs to the village now. Then on the south end, on Clark Street, the village owns in the depth of the lots along Clark Street on the north side and also on the south side, where Jim Mormon lives, about 15 feet west of his house. Depot Street is the property there, belongs to the village and goes back into what was the old red cap field that Don Phantom owns now. If you'd ever developed that in there, there is a street that goes into.
There's 8 lots listed in that. There's, the street is already, drawn at the city maps office here, or the county map office, and there's like 8 lots, 4 on each side of that thing, which someday we're going to do something with, but I haven't had time.
Does the street run clear through those lots? Do they own that property? Or they
It
just
stops.
own it?
It stops at a cul-de-sac on the end. Okay, because Carol Butler owns the house on 303. And it comes right up to the back of his house right there.
The village actually owns property that far? Or is it just drawn that far?
It's drawn that far, right? Like I said, there's not really a cul-de-sac. It just ends right there.
The village does hold a deed to the first part of it, at least.
Yes.
To it. So
Are they 75-foot lots like they used to?
I think they're a little bigger than that. I think they're like 80 or 85, something like that.
most of the lots on Clark Street itself are 25-foot lots.
Yeah, they were about 25 lots.
Yeah.
Jerry Pickett owned that first, and he went to a lot of trouble to get all that straightened out and resurveyed into those 8 lots. That used to be, when we used to get our taxes, we used to get like 22 little parcels that made up that whole thing, and most of them were like alleys that were 15 feet wide, and then a couple little strips here and there. It was all divided into a whole bunch of little strips.
There were several alleys up in that section. And there was an alley that went from Pleasant Street, across Berlin Street, and over to Depot Street, in the depth of the lot, the first set of lots on the north side of Clark Street there. My brother Don's house, owns half of that alley. It was a 25-foot alley, and it was deeded over when the village abandoned it. The people Taylors lived next to him at the time, and each one of them got 25 feet. Same way with where Bob Jackson lives and Mrs. Carnell lives, they each gained 25 feet, or each got half of 12 and a half feet. Then on the east side of Mrs. Carnell's house, it was an alley the same way that the village had in there. They never had a name on them, they just called an alley and showed them on the maps that they existed. Railroad Street, what can you say? It ran next to the railroad, but like I say, originally it was on this side of the railroad tracks, and then when it became Main Street, the town moved there, they moved it to the north side of the tracks, and it still remains as Railroad Street. Franklin Street is the next one back, and that's another one that nobody has any idea where it came from. It had been named for some person somewhere along the way that might own some of the property. I can't find the name Franklin in any of the history of the town. Basically, Dr. Weeks' history of the area is what anything before 1900, you almost have to go by that. And nothing is listed in there on that. Pierce Street is over there. Pierce's owned a grocery store in the corner down here. They owned a farm north of town. Pierce family did. And then they built a big house that's on the corner of Pierce Street and Franklin Street that Woodses live in today. It was Clarence and Arthur. William, I think, was the father. Is that right? W.H. Pierce? That built the grocery store? Clarence and Arthur were the 2 sons that owned the grocery store. Arthur lived across the street from where I live. Thome Street is another one, and boy, that's an unusual name, and I don't know where they ever came up with anything like that. Pardon?
Street, and there's Cooper. Where's Cooper Street?
Cooper Street, well, I've got it down to that. Thome Street, it's just a very short little street. There's 2 houses on the west side, 1 house on the east side of it. Runs by the ambulance station, right? Runs north from there. another one that was simple. There was a Cooper shop on the corner originally, where the house that sits on the corner of Cooper Street and Main Street on the east side, originally that was a Cooper shop that was in there. Then it became Pease's Funeral Home. Then later on, when I was a little kid, it was Dr. Griggs' office. And it was turned into a residence, and it's been a home ever since then. But Cooper Street runs from there to Abbott Street, and then we have Cooper Street Extension that starts behind my shop and runs to Farmer Street. A lot of people think that it's connected down through there, but it's not. We hold a deed to part of it on the south end and on the north end next to the church here. With the Mel House property, I don't know what the man's name is, the superintendent that lives in that house, not back there, Weezer Mel House, but he owns a 60-foot right-of-way from Abbott Street back to his driveway. Most of the church driveway, in fact, the west driveway is on that right-of-way. And then each property up through there, they hold a deed to it, so that it's not a dedicated street. It's just was a proposed idea at some time or other. Never came about.
Well, Cooper Street originally went all the way through. My dad said that he used to remember Town back in 1918, and the street went straight through there.
All the way up through there?
Yeah.
The village never owned a deed, had a deed to it.
Well, he didn't say that they owned it, but he went through their street. Everybody went back and forth on it.
The lot that our house sits on, I have the original deed when my grandfather bought it. And that property, the street wasn't in there. It's part of that deed. He paid a whole sum of $1 for that lot in 1907. It was $1 of other considerations, the deed says on it. It was bought from the Cahoons, which lived in the next house. That's part of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But Weezer owned the property out to Abbott Street, the 60-foot right-of-way out through there. The village never owned that property in there. Farmer Street was named for a man by the name of Bill Farmer. He was a farmer that lived on the street, and he was also killed in the Civil War, so that name's been there for a long time. The original store in Wakeman is the house that's on the corner of Farmer Street and Route 60 or River Street, and where Schouses live. That was the first store that was built in this town. A man by the name of Philo Sherman built that house. Pearl Street is another one that nobody knows for sure, but everybody that has taken a wild stab at it, they say that that section of town was part of the Hyde edition of town, and they think one of the Mrs. Hydes or one of the daughters along the way's name might have been Pearl, and that's where the name came from. The only person I ever knew around here by the name of Pearl was Pearl Felton. But must have been one of the Hydes is what they think could have been where that came from. We have Sheridan Circle, and which is a Don Pannon's allotment in my grandfather's apple orchard. I guess I could describe it that way. But that's kind of simple to come up with Cheryl and Don owning it, so that's where the Sheridan came from. They also have a new allotment going. I called Cheryl this afternoon. Deer Run and Foxwood, that right are the two streets that they have added to the village.
Miss Taylor Street over there in Sheridan.
Okay.
It's our granddaughter's name.
I thought it was all one circle and that.
There's a street that goes across it, north and south.
Okay.
It's Taylor Street.
Well, we know where that one came from too, so that's not here. Somebody start looking for that idea. We'll know where that came from. Stony Brook, which is Vincent's allotment. The little creek that runs through that is called Stony Brook. And you can't find that on any map. And I found in Dr. Weeks' history an article about Stony Brook. So I called Janet and I said, where did you come up with that name? And they traced the deed back when they bought that property and found Stony Brook listed on it. If you look on the county map, it is not listed on there, the name Stony Brook now or anything, but years ago in the old records, they found the name Stony Brook for that creek. So they left it that way. What I found in Dr. Weeks' history book, it doesn't give a date on it, but C.C. Canfield the first and Samuel Pierce, and there was a third man involved with it, but it didn't list his name, it just said another man. We're at the mouth of Stony Brook one day, and they noticed a snake, so they got to watching, and it was all these, they said they were female rattlesnakes, and they killed them. And all the babies came out into the sun. It was a sunny day. And before they got done, they killed 60 rattlesnakes. And anybody says there's never been any rattlesnakes around here, I guess that they're wrong on that. And that's a lot of snakes to kill in one day. And well, in my opinion, it's always been that the only good snake was a dead snake. So it leaves us with two more streets in town that we haven't covered. One is Maple Street, and the only guess I got on that, there were a lot of maple trees there, because Pleasant Street was lined with maple trees, and Maple Street was along on the south side of the house that Mary Jo lives. There were a lot of maple trees there, but not where you live, but you own there. When that was converted into a funeral home when I was a little kid, they had all those trees were out there and they were in their way, and they couldn't figure out an easy way of getting them out of there. Jim Felton says, that's no problem. He just put dynamite under all of them, blew them out of there. He rattled the neighborhood quite well when he did that. There was one maple tree left on it until a couple of years ago. Glenn Muscovich cut that one down. So there are no maple trees left on Maple Street. The last street in town itself is Pleasant Street. And I don't think anybody will buy this, but I'd like to say that Pleasant Street's that way, that was named that because I live on it, but I don't think anybody would buy that story at all. Every town that you go into in the country has got a Pleasant Street. Overland, Norwalk, you go any place, there's always a Pleasant Street in town for some reason. So I assume that's where that came from. Some interesting things about some other things, streets here in town, like Main Street. If you come down the hill from St. Mary's and look at the bridge, Ron Nosak is taping this night. He brought me a picture of the steel bridge that was in there. And then he said he had a picture of the concrete bridge, but it's the original one that was in there. It was changed in 1934. The one that's there was put in there at that time. But if you come from the east to look at the bridge, it's crooked in the road. The engineer laid it out. It was designed that the west end of the bridge was supposed to lay 3 degrees to the north of the east end of the bridge. And the engineer that was on site got mixed up and put it 3 degrees to the south instead of to the north. So it's actually 6 degrees off as you're coming across the bridge. And it's crooked in the road. Most people drive over it every day and don't even notice that there's such a thing there. Went to the township roads. Tried to make a list of all of them. And this is another total nightmare of trying to figure out where any of the names came from. We have Town Line Road 162, and I'm sure that's something the county engineer's office put in. A few years ago, after we got this new street numbering system, we got a fire call one night that there was a fire on County Road 2. We got to the fire station, everybody's standing there. Where's County Road 2? We don't have a County Road 2. Well, we found out we do have a County Road 2. We knew it as Green Street. It's the first road in Wakeman Township, in fact, in Huron County, coming from the east. And they don't use County Road 1 as a distinction for anything. They start all the roads with a 2. We have a County Road 2, but most everybody knows it as Green Street. At one time, it was known as Little Dublin out there because of all the Irish settlers that worked in the railroad built an encampment where the railroad crosses Green Street. They knew it as Little Dublin at that time. Oster Road, I'm sure, is named for somebody. It was 303, was Center Road, Route 20 we talked about. There's Lincoln Road, and I'm guessing that maybe that was named because of President Lincoln. I don't know. But Lincoln Road at one time connected with Burns Road. Went across through the property, the Clark property, and the curve there. There was forded the river and it connected with Burns Road. And it's been 25 years ago that you deeded that property back, Bill, to
Something like that.
the
I can remember, they made it, you didn't go around the curve. You did a little piece there on the corner where the curve is, in front of made a square corner, went across the road by the old schoolhouse, and went down across the river, and come out and climbed. Torn down, but they're on the Clark place.
Yeah, on the Clark place. But it didn't cross the river, and there was quite a dispute for a good number of years with Mrs. Klein on whether the road was on her property or where it was. She tried to claim a lot of the property along Burns Road that belonged to her, and then the property on the east side of Florence or Wakeman, West River Road belonged to the township too for this, and so there was a swap made, got everything settled up finally, and like I say, 25 years ago or such matter, this was all done. And so Burns Road is a separate road to Lincoln Road totally now. But originally the townships, everyone in the state of Ohio, were laid out what they call section line roads. Every mile there was a road. I don't know whether section is a mile across it or how it was done, but and some townships have this. Every mile there is a road there, but Wakeman Township is not that way. There's not that many roads in it. The name Burns Road, when we were kids, they always told us the story that some people burned to death in a house out there. And that's where the name Burns came from for, there's this likely story, why it was just something they told the kids. But I read in Dr. Weeks' history book the other night that there was a house, and I don't remember the people's name now, and there were two people that did die in a fire in the house. But as near as I could figure out where the house was, it was on Fitchville River Road. It didn't come around a corner on the Burns Road. So it was right in that area. So maybe there's truth to the story they tried to tell us when we were kids. I don't know. It just doesn't sound like a likely reason to name the road for that.
Would that be on Fitchville River Road then?
Yeah.
On the Burns?
Yeah.
Then Burns Road just goes over to West River, that's just a short road to there.
Just a short road through there, goes to the Fitchville River Road. So whether there's any truth to that, I don't know, but it is in there where the house actually burnt. There were two people lost their lives in Dr. Weeks' history. It's in there. Ogan Road is supposedly named for a man who worked in the county engineer's office. Is where the name Ogan came from. Fitchville River Road starts in Fitchville, follows the river basically till it gets here, but for years it was known as Canfield Road here. At least from Route 20 north, everybody referred to it as Canfield Road because they were the original settlers on it. They owned quite a bit of property along there. So once it turns and gets into Florence Township, it becomes Burr Road then, so that confuses the issue even more. We have West Town Line Road, which for years everybody called it Maple Street. The Humphrey Farm is on that road. And people refer to that as Maple Street. So I assume that maybe it was lined with maple trees years ago. We have Brushwood Road. Would anybody besides Bill know where Brushwood Road is?
Yeah, just a little short road.
It's just a little short road.
You mean St. John Road, Fitchville Road?
What is between St. John Roads and Fitchville River Road. But the area on Shenango Road, south of Oster Road, is what was always known as Brushwood. Well, I don't know how the combination of how. Do you have any idea how that got that way, Bill?
I know.
We always call them brushwood.
That was always called Brushwood out there.
Yeah.
Don, you got any idea?
No, still called brushwood by a lot of people.
Yeah. So,
But the sign that's on it now is wrong. It's Brushwood Road. You look at the signpost on there. I noticed it marked because I drive traffic with Kenny Green. And you go down and you see this green sign up there. It says Brushwood.
Yeah, because the other is brushwood.
And it all used to be Brushwood Road. But it says Brushwood now.
I don't know.
Yeah, we always call that calls for a house, or we live brushwood.
Shenango Road, which is another one that, I hope it wasn't somebody's name, because I hate to have to write the name Shenango, or sign my name that, I don't know. Butler Road is a county road. Have no idea where the name came from, but I have an interesting story about it. A man by the name of Ambrose Smith lived in Clarksville for years, but before he moved to Clarksville, he lived in Ashland County. And Brushwood Road, or Butler Road, started at his farm and ran north. He was from Clyde originally, and had moved over and bought this farm, and he said he got to noticing that in his woods there was all this kind of trees here, and the same kind of trees over here, and in the center there was an entirely different type of tree, and he couldn't figure that out. So he asked the old timers around there, why is that center section different than the rest of it, where they walked out there? And they told him that Butler Road is lined up directly with Atlanta, Georgia. And all the prisoners that were on Johnson's Island were marched up Butler Road to the Vermilion. They came up, hit Route 60, and went into Vermilion, were loaded on the boats and taken out to Johnson's Island. And they cleared the way, that they made him cut the timber on the way to march him through there. And that's why that section of timber was different on his farm. He said, if you get a map out, I've never been able to line it up myself. I've tried, I never even tried. He said it would line directly with Atlanta, Georgia. Something that...
Well, it goes clear across the county, don't it?
Yes, it starts at the edge of Ashland County. And he lived in Ashland County on the south side of the county line there. It makes sense it could happen because part of the Underground Railroad came through here, and they could have come the same way. There were a lot of houses along Butler Road that hid the runaway slaves, the Fletchers and the Rosses, and on down the Denmans on corner of Denman Road and 60. They all hid runaway slaves, so they could have been very well been what happened there. We've got names that don't exist anymore. A lot of people named things, they had their own name for them. Like we talked about, that's Brushwood out there. There was French's Bridge. You talk about French's Bridge today, and everybody looks at you and says, what are you talking about? That's where the river bridge on 303 was always called French's Bridge, because they owned the house. Both the original houses there on the hillside where the French family lived there. There was White Joe and White Fox. White Joe is where the Butler Road crosses the railroad this side of Route 18. I think I got this right. White Fox is where the Big Four crosses Butler Road. There were names that people gave to these areas. We have Samtown. You ever heard of Samtown?
Yeah.
You guys know where it is. It's where Bear Road crosses 303. And that's called Samtown.
There used to be a cheese factory there on the corner. On the south side of the road.
Long before my time, I'm sure. I've always heard it called Samtown. And I'm quite sure there's a bunch of other names like that. Like I said, they call it the Irish settlement Little Dublin out here. There was another big Irish settlement at the West Town Line Road in the railroad tracks, but I don't recall what the name of that one was, but they had a name for that at the time. That's most of the streets, the names of the ones that I could come up with.
Hanford Road was named for a Hanford family that owned property out there.
I did find that in Dr. Weeks' history also. They called him Squire Hanford. He actually lived on Route 20, I think, where the Dunn place is.
Right.
He and all 5 of his wives.
Are buried over here in the center.
I found one. And
But his descendant was here a few years ago,
Sarah,
3 or 4 years ago, and stopped in and talked to us. And they had been to the east where part of their family was. And they live in California. And they had come here because people in the east, I don't know which state it was in Connecticut, so they came out here, and they also went to the cemetery up there, where there's a monument with this Hanford's name on it, and with his 5 wives' names on it also.
The fifth one outlived him. According
Did
to
he?
Dr. Weeks' history, he died from the kick of a horse. It said he was 72 or 74 years old at the time. I found that in Dr. Weeks' history. Has anybody ever read this history? There's copies of it here in the library.
Well,
Yeah.
Town Line Road 162 that you got out here, that used to go just to the top of the hill at one time, and, well, you was trustee that there was just a path really laying through over to Butler Road, and then the township cleared that out of there. And they finished that road up. Town Line Road 162.
It goes over.
You go down there and you'll make a curve some, but you'll still come out over on Butler Road.
And then it continues on east to the county line.
Yeah, then it continues on, but then you share that property with Clarksville too.
Right.
Then there's Nash Road out here, that's another. new one.
It's a shared road with Florence Township.
Well, they put that one in too, or the township put that road in. So because part of that in Erie is, Erie County.
Green Street was the same way. It was closed for years and years. You couldn't get through there.
Well, that's all it was.
Sometime in the
just,
50s, I think that was opened up,
You
wasn't
get
it?
through with the what?
See,
What? When you cleared that out, Nash Road.
yeah, that was, probably 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah, it's been more than that now.
Well, see, 60 north was East River, and the other side of the river was West River Road. It was that way, well,
Before it was Route 60, it was East River Road.
Like I say, if you look in the phone book, the Lorraine telephone book, they'll list it Vermillion, Savannah, Iowa. Then West River Road in Huron County is West River Road, and in Erie County is West Road. They dropped the river off of it sometime along the way.
River.
And Florence Wakeman Road is the same way, that's obvious where that name came from. Because center of Florence Township, with that, yeah, it is, because that's where their school was, and everything was at Florence. Birmingham was in the very east end of Florence Township.
And that road was supposed to come straight through, but a man had a barn there, and he wouldn't let him put the road through there. He had a barn, right on, what's the name of that road?
Burns Road.
Burns Road, okay. He had a barn opposite where that road comes out on Burns Road, he had a barn there, and he wouldn't let them go through there. But that road was supposed to go straight through there.
There are a good many roads around the country, if you drive through, and especially where they cross the county line, they don't line up. You curve back and forth. Heartland Center Road north of Townsend is that way. And evidently, the people in one county didn't agree with the people in the other county, or something of that sort, and that's why the road has a curve in it. They've never bothered to take them out of them. Any questions on this? This was a subject I just couldn't come up with a whole lot of information on.
What's the time? It's supposed to be 5 miles, one way or the other.
I think so. 5 miles square.
Wakeman Township, there's always been an argument on that. The townships are supposed to be 6 miles square, and Wakeman Township is 5 miles square. But I don't know how it would work out to be that way.
Maybe because we run on Lorraine County over here.
There's property on Town Line 162 out there, the one farm out there is in 2 counties and 4 townships. You get into that situation.
Yeah.
People may have owned a place now that on the north side of the river, Slanskas lived there for years, and it was known as a Manclota place years before that. But the house was in Huron County, in Wakeman Township. I think the barn the barn is still in Huron County.
Yeah.
But the line is just east of their place, so that a lot of other places around that are mixed up like that. Telephone service. Years ago, when they were local telephone exchanges, example of that. North of Route 20 was a Wakeman telephone exchange on both sides of the road. South of Route 20 was a Townsend telephone exchange. And for years, well, they still carry a Norwalk telephone number. Yours is a Norwalk telephone number south, and north was a Wakeman telephone number. We get into that on a fire call every once in a while. They get mixed up on who's it supposed to be. Congress and those places down through there are in Townsend Township, but they've got Wakeman phone numbers.
Well, when we lived in Brushwood, our telephone went out in 44 and 45 when we had all the snow and stuff. And I went down, telephone line was down in the wires. So I went along and cut the stays on the top of the fence, and tied it down to the fence, and our telephone went back to work.
Fixed up your own line. There's a fire call or anything, you just pick up the receiver and the most end of the, operator would tell you where the fire was, so everybody knew where it was.
Next month, we're gonna do that. They wanna do the history of the fire department, and we're gonna put the history of the police department
Oh, boy.
in with that. We've had some colorful people in the police department over the years, so we're gonna add that into it. It won't be so hard for me to find information on all of this. Like I say, I've talked to different people on the streets, and nobody has any idea of where the streets that we don't have the information on, nobody can come up with where the rest of the names came from. We assume most of them are named for somebody, but we don't know who that somebody was.
Green Street goes on past Lincoln, so,
Yeah.
Green Street goes on past Lincoln Road.
Right.
Up in there,
On top of the hill.
just up on top of the hill.
Green Street is now known as County Road 2.
Mm-hmm. That's what your address is.
But on Camden's side of the street is still Green Street.
Is it?
Yeah. You look at the sign when you come down, and not from 20, but from the other crossroad. It's got on there Green Street.
Coming from Bates Road.
It was closed north of Lincoln Road for years. You couldn't get down the hill there. And it had another distinct name at that time. It was called Pucker Brush Alley.
Right.
Is there a difference between Green Street and Green Road?
It's the same road. But I don't,
Because in Florence Township, I think it's called Green Road, isn't it?
Green Road is Florence Township.
Yeah.
But they always said street here, you know. So. And I found an 1890-something ad from Pease's Funeral Home. There was 2 generations of Peases that had a funeral home here in town. They were also, both of them were justices of the peace, both generations. One of them was a town constable, and I found an ad in there where they come to their office on the corner of Railroad and Cooper Street. So I found out that it was Railroad Street on this side of the tracks for so many years. We had 3 different newspapers here in town over the years. I don't know what Echo was one of them was called, and Independent Press. Somebody, I've got different copies of it, people brought me, and I was looking in there not very long ago and found that railroad.
Different towns and township, and you're also farms.
Yeah.
What was that?
Well, I was thinking Stackhouse is part of the farmers in towns and township, and on the other side is Cornelius lives in Wakeman Township.
Right. And you get a little farther south of there, and you get into, like Hahn's place up there is another one that's in Fort Township.
Yeah, get into Heartland and Clarksville up there.
And
There's 4
the
townships.
original idea of the Western Reserve School System was to take Clarksville, Heartland, Townsend, and Wakeman Townships and put them together in a school system and put the school right there. It was the center of all of it. But at that time, Clarksville Township didn't have enough property valuation to carry their weight. And that's the reason that never came about. You have cookies and punch for anybody that's interested.
Thank you.
Shenango Road is quite a long road, though, from the thoroughfare to London, 162. So that's quite a long road.
Yeah, that's one of them. I have no idea what that means.
It goes south of 162.
Did you find anything about the road that was supposed to have gone, where Harold Walton's driveway goes back in to the Dunn Farm on the north side of 20?
Was that a regular road?
That was one time it was a regular road, and then it made a 90-degree turn and come out by Homer Dalton someplace over there.
You see, that would have probably fallen into the section line road of every mile. There would have been a mile east of town to it.
Yeah.
I know there was a barn back in there years ago where they kept hay in it. This is in back of Firelands Manor Trailer Park. Just east of there is where the road was,
Yeah.
where
Drive's still in there.
there's two houses there, and the drive is actually in between them.
What's
Goes
the-
back in there.
The drive?
I don't know what the name is.
But that was a road at one time?
Yeah, it was supposed to have been a road. It was someplace I saw a map that showed that that was a road. It went back and then it came up to Route 60. It never went east anyplace. It just went straight back and then came up to Route 60. See, that would have made it a mile from 20 to that road, and then a mile from north to Lincoln Road.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been a mile.
Your section line road.
Yeah.
That's probably a shorter way to get to town.
The Firelands Manor, when they named the streets in that, I don't know why Harold used the name Maple Street in there. All the streets in that are a name of a tree. There's Oak Street, I don't know what all the different ones are, but Maple Street is in it. And it gets very confusing, because every once in a while we'll get somebody here in town, a delivery truck of some kind, and they're on Maple Street up here, and they'll come around looking for this address on Maple Street. They're a long ways from where they're supposed to be. Same way with Cooper Street Extension, people they'll come down the street and they'll want to know where the funeral home is. Well, you're on the right street, the wrong end of it. So
I was going to ask Don, how do you come up with these names? Do you have to go to the township or to the village? How was he able to name those streets out there?
you can name it whatever you want, can't you?
You can name the streets whatever you want, and then
There are a lot.
it's plotted. When you submit, like my developments here, when I submit it to the county map office, then it's plotted right there, at the map office. Your engineer puts all that in there when he, puts everything together for your developments. So you can name your streets anything you want to. There's no rhyme or reason. The only thing was the village asked us not to put anything with river in it back in my new development, because the subdivision is named River Bend subdivision, but they asked not to put it in the streets anywhere because we already have a river street here in town, and then you have West River Road, and they said it would just confuse everybody, if we did that. So we left river out of those streets that go back in there.
Have Mattis put a name on the
That's
street?
I'm not sure. That's Edgewater. Edgewater's the name of the development, but I'm not sure what the name of the street is. It may be what it is. I don't know for sure. But yeah, you can name your streets anything you want to.
A couple of people came to me and said that Don Fannon's got me this time, because I made a statement that I've been in every backyard in this town with a tractor mowing weeds or plowing a garden. He's building this new development over there, and he's got me. Well, I got news for him. We farmed that land when I was little. There were 2 fields there, an upper and a lower field. And I can also tell you there's a nice 20-foot log chain buried in there someplace that we lost one night when
We
we
used
were
to
in
have a
deep
lot of,
trouble.
we used to have a lot of Christmas trees down in there too, dead and flat.
That was over here,
Yeah,
and this allotment, but then his new allotment.
yeah. One of the cutest names in the county, I think, for a road is Dogtown Road.
Fairfield, isn't it?
No, it's up in
Monroe?
Norwich Township. John Elminger lives on there.
I really like Lover's Lane.
Goes into
I like the name Lover's Lane. I miss the same thing over towards.
There are a lot of accidents.
How do you know about that place?
I just read about it in the paper. There are accidents over there all the time.
It was one of them like Green Street, it was closed for a long time, but you could get part way back, and so
Oh, yeah.
that one must be how she
That was the
off.
challenge.
No, I don't even know where it is. I just read about the papers.
You know where the drive-in is, west of Norwalk, the drive-in theater? That's halfway road, if you go down that Lover's Lane, it goes off of it.
I do know it's on the north side of Twain,
Right.
Yeah.
but I surmised that from articles I read in the paper about accidents, but I don't know where it is exactly.
See, next month, we're gonna talk about fire department, police department.
I think there's
Yeah,
probably
we
a lot
have
of
firemen
people,
here.
I think there's probably a lot of people don't know about Storyville. Where it is,
It's hard to find.
in the very southwest part of the corner of the county, but near Willard.
Maybe by our, when we have this next month, we might even have our new fire department like that.
Yeah.
We're talking the 15th of April for delivery on it, the last I heard, so possibly would be here.
The new fire truck.
One of the boys I mentored in the reading over there, reading a book on firemen, I said, have you seen the fire truck? He said, yes. Oh, no, they brought the fire truck to us, that must have been last year. So that'd be something nice to take to the school. And make it a meeting.
If I find that log chain, Dave, I'll bring it back to you.
Brand new 20-foot log chain.
They're all one long piece.
Yeah, probably one long stiff piece.
Then you'll know he's being truthful, huh? Yeah.
It was my brother that plowed it under, so it wasn't me that came
So looking back, I didn't know that man was back.
Yeah, you're supposed to be watching for it.
Well, I was the one that got stuck, and he went walking down the chain, and told me how.
By the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People down there, they might have tried over there, nice to read.
No,